thought it would be cool to take our time in the car and talk about how we kind of came to own Master's Choice and how it kind of came to be, and how LC kind of stumbled on it and purchasing it in the early days and six-pack challenge stuff and all that. So, does that sound acceptable?
Sure.
Yes.
So when did you first kind of have exposure to Master's Choice? I mean, I know it was before we owned it, but how far before?
It would go back to the days when Paula and I did a lot of independent consultant work for dairies. I was a dairy nutritionist, and she and I was working for the old Mormon feed manufacturing company that merged with ADM, and was a dairy specialist nutritionist for Mormons and ADM, and it kind of evolved into some economic depression in our area with a couple of really dry years in a row, and we experienced 2 really hard droughts, actually about 3 in the early 80s. Really difficult years, wiped out a lot of young farmers. Our area, Southern Illinois, the dairy there was populated with young farmers, and so we took a lot of dairy out of the area. And so Paula and I began to be regularly requested from ADM that we move into an area that was going to be a lot more heavily dairy populated. They were having to stretch us out too far. I was moving too many miles to be able to cover dairy back in those days, to be economically efficient for them to have a specialist in the area. So we believed that a move was inevitable, and that eventually we were going to have to do that, and we likewise had been praying about that for some time. Every time they'd make a request, we knew that our roots were in Southern Illinois, and that's where God was planting us and where He wanted us to stay, raise our family, and that there was work for us to do there for Him and for His kingdom. And so we knew that moving was probably something that made sense from a business standpoint, from work standpoint. It didn't make sense to us as it related to our relationship with the Lord. And so we thought we'd better begin to look for something different. And so we developed a consulting business that was kind of an over-the-shoulder approach, that we were never going to be the initial nutrition consultant package on a farm, because we knew that we couldn't cover enough ground and live in Southern Illinois to make that work. So we instituted a new kind of a system where we developed software that would help analyze what was going on a dairy farm, and used the skills and the resources of the nutritionist that was on the farm. And if a dairy farmer so desired, they could employ us for what we called an over-the-shoulder approach, where we would come in and we would look at what's being done on the farm, the work that the nutritionist on the farm was doing, and work with the on-farm nutritionist to be able to arrive at the position of feeding cows that was the most efficient and effective for that dairy farm. Back in those days, a lot of the nutritionists on farm were working for various feed companies, and they had motivation to promote certain products that came from byproducts that they had particular control over. For example, it's not like today where most of your nutrition groups are independents that work strictly for the farm. These guys were motivated to sell a lot of feed. There wasn't anything wrong with that. That was how they got paid, was commission on feed sales. And so this over-the-shoulder approach that we developed was one where we wouldn't work directly with the farmer, because we didn't want to embarrass the nutritionist on the farm. But we would look at all of the diets. We would look at the We would look at the analysis of the cows and the management that was delivered. It was, this filling out the software, filling out the questionnaires for the software. It took a few hours, but we had a pretty good picture of the farm that we could look at. Then I would look at diets and balance those, and I would come back and have a conference with the on-farm nutritionist and ask him why we were doing things a certain way or a particular way, and make suggestions that might be more efficient for the farm. Worked really well because we didn't try to step in front of the nutritionist. The nutritionists weren't threatened. We would understand why. I worked for a feed company. I understood why they did things a certain way. If it was in the farm's best interest that we do something a little differently, talk to the nutritionist and try to determine, how we might be able to work together where we could benefit, where he still got adequately compensated for the work that he did on the farm, but yet it wasn't costing the farm an excessive amount of money. So we wound up with over 1,000 clients in that thing, and it far exceeded our expectations. And so we were working with dairy farms all across the country. I mean, the news spread pretty fast. What we were doing, people liked it. A very nominal amount of money that we charged for that service, provided a lot of good information, and balanced diets all the way from calves to dry cows to growing heifers to the lactating groups, and encourage different management schemes. So it was a good deal for everybody. So say a lot of that to say this: we were working with some farms over in Missouri, and along with farms in many other states. But what was significant about the Missouri farms is that there was a pocket of them over there that I couldn't work, I couldn't balance. I tried to make suggestions to improve their performance, and man, we would just I could make their cows sick. I could make performance worse, but I couldn't get them to milk. And so rather than just give up on them, I made some visits over there to Missouri, to those farms. Long story short, or shorter anyway, is that they all had one thing in common, and that they were feeding this little company that nobody'd ever heard of called Master's Choice. That was the corn that they were raising for silage and some high moisture corn situations, earlage and so forth. And so begin to look at that corn through the lab, and we weren't seeing anything unusual about it. Worked with various labs and say, there's got to be some kind of a denominator here, because this is, this corn's just not working. And back in those days, we were just beginning to identify that there were differences in fiber. We'd look at a forage sample, and if it had a certain amount of NDF, nutrient-digestible fiber in it, then we would make certain estimates on how well that forage would feed based on fiber, and the country was coming to be aware that there were differences in that fiber, that some was more digestible than others. And so kind of suspicion to maybe that was a situation with this corn, but we had a hard time proving it. Finally wound up with a lab up at Fulton, Illinois, at the Agri-King lab up there, Anna Lab, and talking with a Dr. Binga up there, that their nutritionists had run into the same problem balancing that corn, and that they'd begin to look a little more extensively at it, and he had a lot of unique tests that they had ran on that corn, which allowed us to see that it was very unique. So spent a lot of time to answer that question, but it was kind of a long and drawn out process for us. It was a process that took over a year for us to be able to actually accurately analyze and to correct. But what we found was that this corn is more digestible. We knew how good the fiber was, which was pretty good, but what we didn't know was that the grain digestibility was far exceeding that of what we were finding in the conventional corn genetics that were used for corn silage back in that day. So we'd take some grain out of the diet. We'd reduce some of the more expensive parts of the components of that diet, and the cows would not only bounce back, but they would go up in milk. It was really unique. And We could get them to perform very well, but starch levels that we typically ran back in those days, 25-30% starch in the diet, we couldn't run those with Master's Choice. We had to pull the starch back to the 20-25% levels, which was kind of a new deal for that period of time in history. So that's what the beginnings with Master's Choice were. We kind of discovered it, not by accident, I guess, but more, as a response to doing our jobs and consulting on the dairy farms that we serve. And although this little company wasn't very big, it was just doing a few bags of corn wherever we'd find that corn in a pocket. The people were pretty happy with it, and once you figured out how to feed it, they were really happy with it. And so we carried that forward with some other seed wholesalers and with some groups that were distributing higher quality seeds, higher energy feeds, feed through the seeds that they were selling, and begin to lead them to understand that there was a difference in that corn and it had nutritional enhancements. So it just kind of started a journey for us that led us to a relationship with the previous owner of Master's Choice, a man by the name of John Rucker in West Central Illinois, and became a very good family friend through that relationship. We helped him to see some of the differences in his corn, so as he began to promote it around the country, he knew a little bit more how to feed it. So we brought the nutritional side of that business to play for him, and out of his gratitude back to us, as he looked towards retirement, he was looking for somebody to carry on that legacy of Master's Choice, and so we became the target of his affections. He made it possible for us to be able to buy the business, and it's grown significantly since that day.
So, to tell this story, something that a lot of people probably don't know is that he hounded you to buy Master's Choice for a while before we actually bought it. He had approached you multiple times before we said yes, correct?
I farmed back in the late 70s and early 80s, and in the late 70s, the thing that you wanted to do was you wanted to get as big as you could, as fast as you could, because things were really going well. And so we were out growing our businesses, and as a young farmer, I was adding more cattle, we was feeding more hogs, we was adding acreage. We were working hard growing our enterprise, but we did it with a lot of debt. We were leveraged pretty heavily. Back in those days, lending institutions weren't afraid to do that. Everything was really going well. The more you did, the more money you made, and so they were easy to loan money. So we had too much money borrowed. Interest rates were really high. A lot of there was some interest in that 15 to 20% range, and so of course when you hit some very difficult years there in the early 80s, actually near impossible years in those early 80s, when it was really hard, wasn't too hard to lose money and go broke. So Paul and I did. We went broke in the early 80s and farming, and just couldn't generate enough revenue to make things work. So we kind of gave it up, and that's when I went to work off the farm as a feed salesman, and then wound up being brought online as a nutrition consultant specialist for dairy. What we didn't expect or didn't anticipate was how difficult that it was living through that period of time when you were so concerned about paying your bills and keeping your reputation intact. When you're going broke and just couldn't make ends meet. So when posed with the opportunity, to spend millions of dollars on something like a seed business, that scared me to death. We didn't have the resources to do it, number one, and so we would be totally dependent on borrowed capital again, and that didn't work out too well for us the last time. So I was very reluctant to step off into debt again. We had things going and working pretty well for us. You know, we had regular income again, and we weren't worried about the bills, and to risk that and remember all the sleepless nights and waking up in cold sweat and all that just was not what I was looking forward to. But you want me to tell you how we wound up with it?
I would like that.
Yeah.
I was there.
You Andrew were definitely
She was there.
And Paula was definitely there. And between the two of you, you convinced me that you had been praying about this and that it was the right thing to do and that God was involved with it. And I was more concerned about myself than I was about pleasing God, and I was more concerned about my frets and worries and things than I was about seeking God's wisdom. And so naturally, when you two begin to try to convince me that it was the right thing to do, I eventually had to turn back to God and ask Him, you know, what kind of a move is this? Is this the right thing? And then, of course, He wound up revealing to me that certainly it was a move we were supposed to make.
How old were you when we purchased Master's Choice?
About 50.
Early 50s.
Yep.
Did that play into your initial reluctance to start something completely new in your 50s?
Oh, heck no.
No?
No. I've always been one to aim high and have high expectations. It's not just shoot for the stars and settle for something less. I've never wanted to settle for anything in my life. I've always felt like, you know, if it's achievable and it's God's will, then why limit yourself? Too many people today in our culture decide what they can and can't do, and they're willing to place limits on that. And I've never been that guy. So no, I'm in my 60s, approaching my mid 60s now. I'm ready to start a new adventure if that's what I feel like I need to do.
So, Mom and I talked you into doing it.
Yeah, you did.
So we assumed control of the business in 2005.
Papers were signed officially November 2005, wasn't it, Paula?
Yes, we signed papers on my birthday that year. But what Lynn didn't say earlier was that we had always had a dream of owning our own business and having a family business, and had been praying about that for several years when this just kind of came out of nowhere. And so to me, it was an answer to prayer of that dream that I think God had placed in our hearts earlier. So it all clicked. It made sense to me that it was God that had put this together for us, and we couldn't turn our backs on it.
Family farm was what I always assumed that was going to be. That our families were going to be farming together, and you know, the grandparents and the kids and the grandkids would all be, you know, working the ground together, working the land together, livestock together, and that was kind of what I always figured. And we got that door slammed on us, or closed on us, and another door opened. So pretty neat.
So 2005, I guess, was it? That would make it spring of 2006 was our first production.
Actually, no, we worked with John on the crop in 2005. He was gracious enough to let us determine what we felt like we could get done there in terms of getting a crop sold. So he forwarded the money for the crop, allowed us to kind of help come up with a production plan for that year, and helped us see that we could get that crop out, produced and grown. So actually it was the spring of 2005 was our first crop, although we weren't the official owners of the business until November of 2005 after that crop had been harvested.
So we clearly couldn't have, I mean, people listening to this may have heard this story before about us acquiring the business, but probably never been said on the record that there's no way our family could have afforded the business if it weren't for the grace of John Rucker to make that so.
Paul and I had jobs, and we were paying the bills, but we had no assets. We were broke. There was no way we could have done that without John's help and his graciousness, and then, you know, I know that the business was overwhelming. I mean, it was starting to grow, and what John wanted to do was breed corn, and he didn't want to have to travel to try to market it or anything. And it was a meager beginning. I mean, you look back and you think that it's, from where it was at, that it wouldn't be that difficult, but it was a big change for him. But rather than just bail on the business, he sold it to us. I tried to convince him to maintain part ownership, because I said, John, this is going to grow, very unique, and it's going to, and the word's going to get out, and people are going to want this. Maintain part interest in the business, and he said, no, I want you to take it. I want you to make it happen, and I want it to be yours. But he stayed on as our head plant breeder for a few more years until he was ready to hand off the baton to the next generation plant breeders, working with the genetic base, and he was just awesome. I mean, it was never a time that I felt like there was any jealousy that he had, that he sold the business and that it was doing so well. He was sincerely pleased about that. He made it possible for us to be able to buy it. I mean, we own a huge debt to John, for what he did for us, and being able to not only own the business, but to help us to grow it, because seamlessly was able to maintain, the breeding of the hybrids that were going to go into the lineup in the next years. And that lineup was growing every year. When we bought the business, there was 4 or 5 hybrids in the lineup. Today, I don't know, what do we got, Alex? 30 plus, maybe, hybrids in the lineup, and that's a result of the work that was done the last 10 years. It's not the result of the work that we're doing today. Those things won't be evident for a few more years. But those discoveries in R&D have happened, and John was largely responsible for a lot of that, and how it unfolded too. So yeah, to say that we couldn't have done it without John would be a wild understatement.
So fast forward. Well, actually, let's go back to November of 2005. One of my favorite parts when we tell this story for people, and surely has never been stated on the record. When we started the business, the office was in the smallest bedroom at Jer's and Mom's house.
Yeah,
and smallest bedroom was 10 by 10?
10 by 10. Yeah, 10 by 10, and it was, of course, we had 2 sons, Andrew and Caleb. They each had a bedroom, and downstairs. Upstairs was Paul and I had a bedroom, and there was also a small bedroom, a 10 by 10 room with a closet. It had a closet, and we used that for my office. That's where we kind of did the nutrition work that we did. That was the place that we worked there at that 10 by 10 den.
And then we became big shots when I moved out. Caleb took my room, and Caleb's old room was bigger than 10 by 10.
That required a lot of change, and man, we thought we would hit the big time. In the 10 by 10, we had enough room for a table in the middle, and I had a chair on one side of the table, and Paul had a chair on the other side. One of those white. It was a 6 foot long table, about 2 foot wide, and that was my and her desk that we shared.
I wish we had pictures of those days.
Yeah, well, that space is still there, but we've taken the walls out and we've included it into the rest of the common living room and dining room area now. And Paul insisted on putting a bigger window in there, so it's got a bay window in that area, which was the original office space. But we moved out when you moved out. We moved you all the way out in the backyard.
Yeah.
We had a machine storage shed out there, and we just kind of closed part of that in and made an apartment for you, so that when you were off to the local junior college, you had a little independence as well. And so we moved you out there, and your bedroom became available, and we went into that, which was a 12 by 14, and you had a closet all the way across one wall. And we thought we'd just died and gone to heaven, because
Big time.
oh man, we went down there and we put countertop all the way around 3 walls of that bedroom, and we had so many possible desk stations. While there was 3 or 4.
Yeah, there was like 5 people that worked out of that bedroom.
Oh my goodness! We thought that was
You, me, Mom, Heath, and Jerry.
Yep, first employees, Heath and Jerry Hayes.
And then as we grew, we had to put Mom's desk out into the living room in the basement.
Yep, so that we could create another space.
And then that's when things start to really pick up. We moved out into the pole barn.
Understand, those first years, Paula did absolutely everything. I drove around the country and just asked people to try our corn. I was the only salesman, and we began to work with seed distributors, and they began to distribute and sell our seed. But I was the guy that would go around and help equip them and talk about all of the differences in the corn. And Paula was at home, and she did all of the accounting, all of the billing, all of the accounts payable and receivable. She did all of the marketing, put together all the marketing pieces, did the work for that. She answered all the calls, helped line up all the appointments, all the meetings, hotel accommodations, everything she did out of that office. And then it was pretty neat when Heath came on and Jerry came on, because Jerry began to pick up on some of the production responsibilities and shipping.
The logistics too, and helped me with that. So
Yeah.
that was a big load off my shoulders at the time.
He was growing parent seeds in southern Illinois, where we were trying to maintain trying to keep seed clean, and just handled a lot of the logistics. But then Heath came on, and he handled a lot of the was an administrative assistant role for you, Paula, where he was really good with software and some of the things that we were doing in marketing. He was really quick, and he helped a lot with promoting materials that we would need, and technical bulletins, and helping to write some of the text, and so that was also a big help. Kind of relieved you in a lot of areas. But you had it all for a long time.
So we had several more building projects after that to take us where we are now. But let's talk for a second about how, brand new business that we've got. What was it like in the early days trying to convince the customer base to try a little independent, tiny seed company from Illinois?
There's a little known communication network out there in the country today. It's called the Amish Internet, and so as it just so happens, some of our early beginnings were with some of the Amish and even a lot of Mennonite communities that tried our corn, and they were very generous to share good news and their experiences with their friends and neighbors and family. That was not only in that particular area, but likewise those neighbors, friends, family that were in other areas around. So our business grew pretty quickly by word of mouth, and that was important to us, very significant to us and to our growth. A lot of those clients were small farms, and they didn't buy a lot of corn, but very loyal, and so we did our best to be able to educate them on how to take advantage of the corn the best that we knew how, with the nutritional advantages that it carried. So that was a big benefit.
6 bags at a time, right?
6-bag challenge. Paula came up with a marketing slogan called the 6-bag challenge, and just a lot of 6-row planters back then, and so just that planter, start that planter out, or when that planter's getting going, just drop 6 bags in it, or drop a couple of bags into 3 of the units was kind of the idea. Plant it next to your favorite, and let us show you just what we could do. But it was all about just asking them to try us. Let us show you that to be nutritionally enhanced, you didn't have to give up agronomics, you didn't have to give up yield. In fact, we could yield and out yield with the best ones, and some of the unique differences about our corn. You don't chop us real high. There's a lot of density in that stalk. There's a lot of sugars in that stalk. We wanted you to bring those into the fermentation, that they had value that other corn didn't. With our corn, it wasn't necessary to try to grind it as fine or to chop it as fine as what a lot of people were doing. We wanted a little more length to chop, get a little more healthier diets, so that just differences in our corn that we encourage people to change.
What are we forgetting, Mom? What part of the story have we omitted?
I remember the day that we signed the papers back in 2005. It was in November. Shortly after that, Lynn left to go on the road, and it was just like, here you go, do with this what you want to. And he went off on the road selling and trying to convince people to purchase Master's Choice and to explain the difference that we'd seen. And I didn't see him for weeks at a time. He would be gone most of the next couple of months, but we'd be home on the weekend a lot. But those were some tough times in the beginning, just trying to, get everybody to try our product, and me staying home, him on the road, kids still at home, being chauffeur, mom, but still I feel like God was in it, and he made it all work for us. So just answered prayer, got us through it all.
I would be shocked if I don't already know the answer to this question, but for either of you, no regrets?
None for me.
No regrets.
And I think that if Caleb was here, he would agree with us. No regrets. I think we've done this in a way that honors our Lord, and that we are all pretty proud of, and just excited. We're 12 years into this almost, so I think the next 12 years are going to be every bit as exciting as the first 12.
Oh yeah, really neat things happening. I mean, it's really exciting to see how it's grown and expanded to so many areas. It's been a blessing. And as we've hired staff and people have come on, it's been a blessing to be a part of their lives and then be a part of the Master's Choice team. We have a wonderful staff of people working for us.
Agreed. Well, that, they say, is how the story goes.
The rest of the story.
Yeah, to be continued.